I think it's hard to call that document a strategy, to be honest. It is more of a MAGA political thesis about how they look at Europe, how they look at Latin America, how they look at Asia. I don't think it's really going to guide policy. As we've seen, President Trump is not someone who is bound to consistency and principle. He's just very transactional. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see going forward, whether or not we now have a so-called national security strategy that says these things.
The United States is warning its NATO allies that Europe must take on more of its own defence and do so fast. The White House is threatening to withdraw from NATO if Europe does not take over the military lead on defence by 2027. It's understood the US wants Europe to take over the majority of NATO's conventional defence capabilities. Pentagon officials have reportedly told European diplomats that leadership over intelligence and missiles will be handed over in the next 12 months. Well, speaking to Times Radio Breakfast, the former Defence Secretary Sir Ben Wallace accused the British government of posturing when it comes to defence.
America has been warning for well over a decade that we've got to carry the burden. At the moment, the only real countries stepping up are Germany, Poland, the Nordic countries. Britain isn't. Britain's back to press releases and, posturing around the world at the moment and spin from the Ministry of Defence. It isn't actually stepping up. It is possible if we want to do it. We have the capabilities, we have the skills, we have the pan-European industrial base that could deliver. But I don't think Britain and anybody else shows that they're prepared to listen, that we need to rearm to deter.
Well, Kurt Volker is a former US ambassador to NATO. Good afternoon to you, Kurt.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for joining us. Look, I mean, the United States has been warning that European allies in NATO need to take up more of the burden of defence of the alliance for many, many years. But, I mean, do you think that the Trump administration is seriously setting this deadline of just 2 years from now for those European allies to take over the majority of its defence capabilities?
Well, I think it's an ambitious goal, let's put it that way. The U.S. has certainly wanted Europe to do more, to spend more, to take more leadership role, especially within the European continent, so that the U.S. can focus on other global responsibilities. And that has been something that has been said by every administration that I can think of, going back to the Reagan administration. They've wanted Europe to do more. So nothing new there. Handing it off in 2 years, that's very ambitious. I'm not sure that Europe can address those capabilities, but it's the kind of thing the Trump administration has done consistently, is to make threats like that, to put things out there in order to shake people up and get more action. You'll remember that the Obama administration had set a goal of 2% of GDP back in 2014 at the Wales Summit. And by the time President Trump took office in 2017, only 3 countries were doing it. So President Trump's style has shaken people up. They've committed now to 5% of GDP on defense spending. Many are moving in that direction. And so I think this is another one of those threats that is intended to get faster action.
Well, I mean, some countries are moving in that direction. Most are certainly increasing their defence spending, including the UK. But they are some way off reaching that target. I mean, looking at the UK, we're currently on 2.3% of GDP. That's due to get to 2.6% by 2027, and only up to about to just over 3 in 10 years' time. I mean, and many other European allies are on a similarly slow trajectory. They're nowhere near, let alone reaching the spending targets, actually getting those capabilities in place within 2 years.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And I think that's exactly why the Trump administration is making threats like this. We'll see how it actually plays out in 2 years' time. I don't put any stock in the idea the U.S. is going to withdraw from NATO. That would be too controversial domestically in the United States. But handing over pieces of the command structure, the military structure, especially if it's in peacetime again, I can see that as being possible. And it is all intended for getting European countries to get serious about increasing those defense spending levels faster.
And we saw, didn't we, the new US security strategy released in the last day or so. And again, that makes it clear that the priority for the Trump administration is looking to its own borders, looking to what's happening in Latin America, and indeed looking at what's happening with the threat from China, rather than looking at the pretty direct threat that there already is to Europe from Russia.
Right. I think it's hard to call that document a strategy, to be honest. It is more of a MAGA political thesis about how they look at Europe, how they look at Latin America, how they look at Asia. I don't think it's really going to guide policy. As we've seen, President Trump is not someone who is bound to consistency and principle. He's just very transactional. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see going forward, whether or not we now have a so-called national security strategy that says these things.
Well, I mean, you say as a MAGA document, and clearly that kind of thinking inspires it. But if it's set out there in the strategy, isn't that exactly what the armed forces or the Department of War, as we now have under Pete Hegseth, isn't that exactly where they are going to focus their attention?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think the typical thing here is the White House will produce a national security strategy. We've seen this in several administrations. It's a very political document. It then is followed by a force posture review, a defense strategy, and a security strategy the Pentagon puts out. Of course, there's going to be an intention of refocusing more on Asia, trying to rebalance the force levels in Europe. We are way up now from where we were in the Obama administration, and look at the missions that the U.S. is going to have to be prepared for, and the ones that Europe could be capable of taking on. So that trend is unmistakable. Whether it happens with the attitude and the speed that is implied in this document, I would be rather skeptical.
How much do you think this is about President Trump just getting tired of funding the war in Ukraine and providing so much of the capabilities that NATO is providing, or through its European allies is providing to the Ukrainians, and the huge cost of that?
I don't think that's a big factor right now. European allies are paying for the arms and ammunition that are going from the United States to Ukraine. So he has already changed that. It's not coming out of taxpayer money anymore. I think he actually likes the defense sales. In fact, building up the defense industrial base is one of the important components within that document. So I don't think that's the factor. I think it is much more, this document is much more driven by this sense that the far right is being shut out of Europe, and they feel that that is a weakening of democracy, a weakening of free speech. And so they want to be focusing on Europe's internal politics as if it were part of the United States. Clearly, this is not about foreign and national security policy. This is about the MAGA movement political beliefs.
We've also got talks continuing in the United States between US officials and a delegation from Ukraine. They are now speaking. We're getting some slightly conflicting signals about whether they're making progress or not. We've just had, of course, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner coming back from their meeting with President Putin. Yeah. Do you think that these negotiators are taking serious account of the Ukrainian concerns, or are we back into this endless cycle that we seem to have seen, whereby a proposal is brought from the Russians that is totally unacceptable, it's then amended, and the Russians then reject it out of hand?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the cycle that we're in. The Ukrainians, I think, were deliberately demonstrating flexibility before Witkoff's trip to Moscow, that produced a document that they would have been found acceptable. It was good enough. Of course, the Russians reject that. Now Witkoff is trying to see, well, is there any more flexibility on the Ukrainian side? I don't think there will be much at all. The Russians will again reject that. And we are in the same place we have been since day one in this administration, where Ukraine is ready for peace, Europe wants peace, the United States wants peace. Only Vladimir Putin has waged this war and continues to want this war. And to get him to change his view on that requires more pressure on Russia's economy, its finances, its military. And so far, President Trump has not been willing to put that kind of pressure on Russia. But I hope as we go through these cycles of rejection by Russia, we get closer and closer to that point.
But if you look again at that security strategy and taking on board what you've said about it, that seemed to blame the Europeans for somehow thwarting a deal because they were standing up for Ukraine's part in all of this. And it sounded as though the US was blaming the Europeans for trying to thwart a deal instead of rightly pointing out that some of the original demands from Russia would simply not be acceptable in Ukraine.
Right, and that's again why I stress this. This sounds to me more like a political treatise than it does an actual security strategy. It doesn't even align with what the administration has already been doing. So I just think that this is something that some people with a very strong ideological bent put together. It is internally contradictory in various places. It is not accurately describing what the administration has done. I don't think it's going to be a guide for what happens in the future.
When we look at what's happening with those negotiations, and as you say, each time a deal goes back to Moscow, President Putin rejects it. Do you think we could reach a point where President Trump actually gets tired of this endless cycle and walks away from the deal altogether?
Well, it depends what you mean by walk away from the deal. In terms of putting in a lot of personal time and energy into negotiations, yeah, I could see that. I think he's going to see that's a bit fruitless. In terms of pulling out, no longer willing to sell American arms that can be provided to Ukraine, I would be surprised if that were the case. I think President Trump knows full well that Afghanistan is a lasting stain on the Biden administration, and he doesn't want a failure in Ukraine to be a lasting stain on his administration.